Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "You go first, for there are many of you. Choose one of the bulls, and prepare it, and call on the name of your God." Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noontime, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no reply of any kind. About noontime, Elijah began mocking them. "You'll have to shout louder," he scoffed, "for surely he is a god. Perhaps he's daydreaming, or is relieving himself. Or maybe he's away on a trip, or is asleep and needs to be awakened." Sometimes, people will use the phrase taking care of business when they're referring to, relieving themselves. Like, if that's what was meant, but the wording was more like, is busy somewhere, was Elijah really mocking them that hard that he's, throwing wordplay jokes in here, too? Because if so, oh, man, the Sasso-meter just went up even further on Elijah. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so we are at 1 Kings chapter 18. As far as we know, King Ahab is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Haven't heard much about Judah in a little while, but this guy Elijah enters the scene, tells King Ahab that, hey, there's not going to be rain for a while because God says, pretty much giving him a warning about that. And then he goes on and does a couple other things that show him to be a man of God, kind of a prophet as well. He helps. He's there while a widow and her son, who would otherwise have ran out of food, are still able to keep making food for many days, it says. And when this woman's son gets extremely sick and apparently dies from that illness, he's also able to bring him back to life and seemingly get through or even past whatever that illness was. But anyway, that's what we've read recently to provide some context for this chapter. So, here we go. 1 Kings 18. Later on, in the 3rd year of the drought, the Lord said to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to King Ahab. Tell him that I will soon send rain." So Elijah went to appear before Ahab. Meanwhile, the famine had become very severe in Samaria. So Ahab summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of the palace. Obadiah was a devoted follower of the Lord. Once when Jezebel had tried to kill all the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had hidden 100 of them in 2 caves. He put 50 prophets in each cave and supplied them with food and water. Ahab said to Obadiah, "We must check every spring and valley in the land to see if we can find enough grass to save at least some of my horses and mules." So they divided the land between them. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. Gonna pause there for a little bit. So, I guess in the sequence of events, it was probably that Ahab and Obadiah had been searching, or had at least begun searching the land for other sources of water to, keep the king's horses and mules fed, because otherwise they were going to die. And then King Ahab would be severely lacking in modes of transportation, in, horses were often used for military reasons as well. And so like, the famine caused by a drought probably was, like, on the brink of severely weakening Israel. It probably had already significantly done so. But it was kind of getting to a tipping point where it's about to get a whole lot worse. And then Elijah says to Ahab that, actually, the Lord has said to Elijah to go to Ahab and say that it'll rain again soon. He hadn't yet spoken with Ahab. So then Ahab and Obadiah are, like, kind of going around looking for water and grass and whatnot, because the drought's so severe. And then we get to verse 7. As Obadiah was walking along, he suddenly saw Elijah coming toward him. Obadiah recognized him at once and bowed low to the ground before him. "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" he asked. "Yes, it is," Elijah replied. "Now go and tell your master Elijah is here." "Oh, sir," Obadiah protested, "what harm have I done to you that you are sending me to my death at the hands of Ahab? For I swear by the Lord your God that the king has searched every nation and kingdom on earth from end to find you. And each time he was told Elijah isn't here, King Ahab forced the king of that nation to swear to the truth of his claim. And now you say, go and tell your master Elijah is here. But as soon as I leave you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you away to who knows where. When Ahab comes and cannot find you, he will kill me. Yet I have been a true servant of the Lord all my life. Has no one told you, my lord, about the time when Jezebel was trying to kill the Lord's prophets? I hid 100 of them in 2 caves and supplied them with food and water. And now you say, go and tell your master Elijah is here. Sir, if I do that, Ahab will certainly kill me." So, alright. Now we get a little backstory here. Obadiah is, like, pretty much worried for his life if he goes to tell Ahab he's seen Elijah, and then Elijah is elsewhere. Because Ahab's been looking all over for Elijah. Probably to try and tell him, hey, you said it would rain again when you gave the word. Do it. But Elijah's kind of coming on his own terms. And yeah, it's still, because of the urgency with which Ahab has been looking for Elijah, yeah, Obadiah is real concerned about him looking like he's lying if Elijah kind of disappears. And then he explains the whole thing that we read kind of in a parenthetical before about Jezebel trying to kill all the prophets and Obadiah hiding 100 of them. So, like, I guess that's also kind of to say that the prophets didn't exactly have much favor throughout the kingdom at this time. It does make me wonder. I mean, I have no reason to believe that that is a different Jezebel than the one that had been mentioned in a previous chapter. Which, I'm pretty sure that Jezebel that was mentioned was one that kind of, you know, didn't follow God and even, like, had a hand in leading some people away from God, but I'm not real quickly seeing Jezebel mentioned where I thought I might. So anyway. Yeah. So it's already not a good situation for the prophets in Israel, or at least a lot of them. So that adds even more reason for Obadiah to be afraid. But then we get to verse 15. But Elijah said, I swear by the Lord Almighty, in whose presence I stand, that I will present myself to Ahab this very day. So Obadiah went to tell Ahab that Elijah had come, and Ahab went out to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw him, he exclaimed, So, is it really you, you troublemaker of Israel? I have made no trouble for Israel, Elijah replied. You and your family are the troublemakers, for you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord, and have worshipped the images of Baal instead. Now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who are supported by Jezebel. Okay, Hebrews says, who eat at Jezebel's table. So, yeah. Almost seems like Jezebel had a real big hand in who was okay and who wasn't. As far as the palace and the kingdom were concerned. And Ahab is like, you, this trouble all started when you mentioned that it wouldn't rain. But Elijah's like, hey, I'm not the one to blame. You're the one who isn't following the Lord. And in fact, he's allowing Jezebel to have this much power, to do all these things, to work against the Lord and his prophets, and promote these other prophets of other beliefs. So they're going to meet at this mountain. To do what? We'll have to find out. Verse 20. So Ahab summoned all the people of Israel and the prophets to Mount Carmel. Then Elijah stood in front of them and said, How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people were completely silent. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Now bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish, and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood of their altar, but without setting fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood of the altar, but not set fire to it. Then call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. And all the people agreed. So there's a test here, I guess. Alright, so the people are gathered, and it seems like, based on what Elijah is saying here, that they were kind of waffling between, the people in general were kind of waffling between worshiping the Lord and worshiping Baal. But he's pretty much saying, alright, y'all have got to come to a decision here. So, let's settle this. We're gonna get these bulls, pretty much have them ready to make offerings to our respective gods. And then whichever god brings fire to the altar, that's the true God. That's the one that's worth following. Because clearly, if, they can do such a sign in front of all these people, then they're worthy of following and worshiping. Verse 25. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "You go first, for there are many of you. Choose one of the bulls, and prepare it, and call on the name of your God. But do not set fire to the wood." So they prepared one of the bulls, and placed it on the altar. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noontime, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no reply of any kind. Then they danced, hobbling around the altar they had made. About noontime, Elijah began mocking them. "You'll have to shout louder," he scoffed, "for surely he is a god. Perhaps he's daydreaming, or is relieving himself. Or maybe he's away on a trip, or is asleep and needs to be awakened." So they shouted louder, and following their normal custom, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. They raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice, but still there was no sound, no reply, no response. So, the prophets of Baal got first crack at this, and nothing's really happening. And then Elijah getting showing just a little bit of attitude here, comes in and is like, "Hey, you know what? Your god Baal, like, surely he's a god worth following, right? If you all have, worshipped him all this time, maybe you just need to do a little more, shout louder, put a little more effort into it. That'll work, right?" And it still doesn't work. And not only did they shout louder, but they started doing other things to try and get the attention of Baal. Because, I mean, now some of the religions had, maybe even still have, some customs like these where, some of the bigger sacrifices or like, there's an idea that the greater the thing being asked of the god or demon or whatever being, the more that needs to be done to, make the thing work, to get them to do the task in question. Quick, I'm gonna look at this note here. So where it says, perhaps he's daydreaming or is relieving himself, it could be read as, is busy somewhere or is engaged in business. See, now that almost makes me wonder if it's a wordplay kind of situation again. Because sometimes, people will use the phrase taking care of business when they're referring to, relieving themselves. Like, the end of the digestion process in which waste is removed from the body. If you catch my drift. So, like, if that's what was meant, but the wording was more like, is busy somewhere, that just, man, I get so much more appreciation out of this from looking at some of these notes and being like, is it, like, was Elijah really mocking them that hard that he's, like, throwing wordplay jokes in here, too? Because if so, oh, man, like, the Sasso-meter just went up even further on Elijah. Anyway, so they try all this stuff and nothing happens. Big shock, I know. Alright. On to verse 30. Then Elijah called to the people, "Come over here." They all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel, and he used the stones to rebuild the altar in the name of the Lord. Then he dug a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 3 gallons. He piled wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid the pieces on the wood. Then he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water, and pour the water over the offering and the wood." So now he's going even a step beyond, and is not only doing the bare minimum of, like, setting it up and not setting fire to it, but he's also making it more difficult for it to get set on fire by, adding all the water on there. Because, if it happened otherwise, it would be a lot easier for someone to be like, oh yeah, well, the wood was already really dry. Some other spark or something might have happened in the midst of there. Like maybe the wood rubbed together in just the right way to make the fire or something. It would be a whole lot easier to, dismiss it as some accidental thing. Despite the fact that the prophets of Baal couldn't make anything happen. So he rebuilds an altar of the Lord that had been torn down to place all this stuff. Hebrew says each of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the Lord had said, "Your name will be Israel." But Jacob got named Israel after the whole wrestling match thing with God, or at least some angel or something to that effect. But yeah, he uses 12 stones to represent all 12 tribes of Israel. Note there, the Hebrew says 2 seahs of seed, but still, it's volume measurement, and that's the rough equivalent based on the translator's calculations and whatnot, I guess. And he laid the pieces of the bull on the wood. Verse 1834 in the Hebrew text begins here. Oh, so this part where it's like, then he said, filled 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering and the wood. That was the start of verse 34 in the Hebrew text. Which actually kind of makes sense, given the next couple of sentences. But anyway, speaking of which, let's move along. Verse 34, as it reads in this version. After they had done this, he said, "Do the same thing again." And when they were finished, he said, "Now do it a 3rd time." So they did as he said. And the water ran around the altar and even filled the trench. At the usual time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command. O Lord, answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have brought them back to yourself." Immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, "The Lord, He is God. Yes, the Lord is God." Then Elijah commanded, "Seize all the prophets of Baal. Don't let a single one escape." So the people seized them all, and Elijah took them down to the Kishon Valley and killed them there. If I remember right, the Kishon Valley was where God had first sent Elijah after making the whole prophecy about the rain and... no, Kerith Brook. Okay, I remembered the K. Maybe that was why. So, anyway, yeah. Elijah steps up to the plate, so to speak. Sets up his offering. Has them pour a bunch of extra water on top of it. Enough for it to overflow for about 3 gallons worth into this trench that was around it. And then when he calls on God at the time of the evening sacrifice, God brings down fire. It consumes the bull, the wood, the stones even, it says. And all the water that was around there. So, like, it wasn't just a little, like, Elijah did everything here. And God did everything here to show that this is no accident, alright? This is a supernatural work being done here. And I guess, you know, in order to help the people turn back to God, or at least turn away from worshiping Baal and all that, he commands the people to seize the prophets, and then they all get killed, because otherwise they could still, you know, make excuses or say whatever else to try and keep the people worshiping Baal instead of the Lord. So note right here when it mentions him praying to, quote, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Hebrews says in Israel instead, which again we just talked about the whole Israel and Jacob being the same person kind of thing. But as a way to help delineate between the person and the nation, it's pretty common for translations to use Jacob when referring to the person and just Israel as the nation. Even though originally he said Israel and not Jacob. Anyway, okay, so big miraculous sign displayed by the Lord. Prophets of Baal have been killed. And then we move on to verse 41. Then Elijah said to Ahab, "Go get something to eat and drink, for I hear a mighty rainstorm coming." So Ahab went to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel and bowed low to the ground and prayed with his face between his knees. Then he said to his servant, "Go and look out toward the sea." The servant went and looked, then returned to Elijah and said, "I didn't see anything." 7 times Elijah told him to go and look. Finally, the 7th time, his servant told him, "I saw a little cloud about the size of a man's hand rising from the sea." Then Elijah shouted, "Hurry to Ahab and tell him, 'Climb into your chariot and go back home. If you don't hurry, the rain will stop you.'" And soon the sky was black with clouds. A heavy wind brought a terrific rainstorm, and Ahab left quickly for Jezreel. Then the Lord gave special strength to Elijah. He tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to the entrance of Jezreel. Okay. Elijah running faster than a chariot? That's definitely some special strength there. And or endurance. And or speed. So, the rain has finally returned. Elijah, after showing the people this sign of God, finally gives the word and the rain comes back. And I guess we'll see what he and or King Ahab do from here. I'm noticing he goes for Jezreel and not, like, say, Samaria. But maybe Jezreel was the nearest, like, village or city that could have been... that someone could have gone to seek shelter or whatever. Note there at Elijah tucking his cloak into his belt. Hebrew says he bound up his loins. Which was... it's kind of what that means, I guess, in a way. You know, a lot of times they were wearing more tunic-style garments that would have made running a bit awkward. So if they planned to do any running while wearing that, they'd kind of, you know, bunch it up, tuck it a certain way to keep it from, like, coming loose and flopping around and slowing them down. Or tripping them up or whatever. So, Ahab gets the word that it's gonna rain. Potentially very hard rain, because it's like, why else would the rain stop him? But anyway, and then Elijah manages to outrun Ahab's chariot. And that's what we get for 1 Kings chapter 18. Okay, so long story short, Elijah kind of clashes with the prophets of Baal, and unsurprisingly, you know, God shows himself more powerful than Baal. And it seems like this might be a turning point for the kingdom of Israel, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens in the upcoming chapters, I guess. So as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications when I upload new videos. I think. Still not sure how that interacts with me checking or unchecking the one box, but whatever. Certainly doesn't hurt. And definitely subscribe to give you easy access. Make sure you look down in the description for links to my social media pages and all sorts of other good stuff like that to help keep up with what I'm doing here. And down below that, leave comments with any thoughts you have. So that'll do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.